Welcome to the Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast, hosted by David Mandell, an attorney, author, and OJM Group partner. We share real-world financial lessons from physicians and insights from experts to impact your bottom line. Check the show notes to get a free copy of our book, Wealth Strategies for Today's Physician. Now, over to David.
Hello, it's Dave Mandell, host of the podcast. Thanks for joining us. We've got a great episode today, and as we were just talking before we started recording, Jason is our first three-time guest. So I was looking back as we, you can celebrate. So I was looking back as we prep for this. His last episode was in season 3. So we're in 6 now, so not 5, not 4, and 3, and then he was there in season 1 as well. So all the last 2 topics are really good, and this one today we're going to focus on compensation models. And I think any doc who's part of a practice, who's not employed by a big institution, who's part of a partnership or a corporation, et cetera, is going to have their ears and eyes tuned, because compensation models, whether it's a law firm, as Jason knows, or a financial firm like mine, everybody wants to understand how they're getting paid. Is there a way for them to get paid more? Is there a fairer way to do it, et cetera? And these are all things we're going to talk about in terms of a medical practice. So let me tell you about Jason, and then we'll start our conversation. So he's a healthcare business attorney at the law firm Benesch in Chicago. He regularly represents all types of physician group practices, ancillaries of every kind, academic medical centers, post-acute care facilities, lab companies, healthcare information tech companies, in M&A and joint ventures, in accountable care and capitated care arrangements and syndications and compliance issues, all of that stuff, the business of medicine. He's been consistently recognized as a leading lawyer by Chambers USA, and he is a former president of the Illinois Association of Healthcare Attorneys, where he also served as member of its board of directors for many years. He has served as the editor-in-chief for Healthcare Law Monthly, LexisNexis publication. So a lot of great experience and a good guy. Jason, thanks for coming back.
Well, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
So, in the past, we talked about, legal issues, working with a lawyer. We talked about ASCs, everything you ever wanted to think about ASCs. We talked about sunsetting partners. I thought that was a really good episode. So for those of you who, that's on your mind, meaning how do I, retire in a way that makes sense, or how do we sunset other partners, go back and look at that. That was, I think, season 3. But today we're going to talk about comp. We're going to talk about comp models. So, and just how partnerships work today. So let's start with that big picture. What does it mean to be a partner in a physician practice today, and how has that changed over the years you've been helping physicians as an attorney?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It has changed a lot, even in the 20 or so years that I've been doing this. And, I think the trend and that shift in terms of what does physician partnership look like and what did it look like back in the 80s and 90s has changed drastically since then. And, there's been a generational shift more than anything else. Obviously, there's a tremendous dearth of new grads in certain areas of the country and in certain subspecialties, tremendous unevenness around the country. But more than anything else, I think the thing that's changed the most is the younger generation. I won't refer to anyone as X, Y, Z, whatever. Younger physicians are just generally more comfortable with an employment model. And so they're looking to health and hospital systems. They're looking to alternative forms of employment. And, whereas the older guys like me, I'm not a doctor, but, any one of my ilk and older, they wanted to come out and they wanted to be their own boss and were willing to take the risks. And quite frankly, the risks weren't as great as they are today. It didn't cost as much to start up a practice, and the overhead wasn't as great. But, young doctors are just generally asking the question, and it's a great question to ask. what does it mean to be a partner in a physician practice nowadays? And you got to be ready to answer that question. And if you stumble over it, they're gonna know that maybe there's some issues there, or maybe it's not all that it's cracked up to be. But it's really important. I think a lot of practices are struggling in answering that question. What does it mean to be a practice? Or they answer the question, but it's not resonating with the younger generation in terms of, is this something that I want, or am I okay going to the local health and hospital system to become an employed doc? So you got to be ready, and you got to think about, it starts with your recruitment right out of fellowship or whatever. And you've got to create what I refer to as a compensation ladder, where someone comes out and you're at the first rung of the ladder, and as they progress through the compensation model, the comp, and I use comp liberally, comp and benefits increase, they get better, so that there is some incentive for the younger physicians to say, hey, this makes sense, I get to make more money, I have more opportunity for advancement as things progress. So things to talk about when you get that question of, what does it mean to be a partner? More generous compensation package, hopefully a seat at the table for decision making, possibly distributions of net profits or dividends at the end of the year. A lot of practices, kind of take everything out at the end of the year, possibly depending upon your comp model. If a practice is interested in selling, maybe a share of the sales proceeds, it's important, to explain that to someone. But they also need to understand it's not a free lunch, and that it comes with responsibilities, administrative responsibilities, potentially signing personal guarantees. So I think you've got to give some thought to folks who are coming up through the ranks. And when you're ready to have that sit down with them of, what does it mean to be partner, you got to have that answer in front of you.
So, it sounds like for docs who are running a practice where they are going to need to recruit docs, young docs coming in, um, everything you said was extremely important and relevant. And it's really answering the question, why? Why would I want to be a partner?
Wow. Exactly.
What's in it for me, essentially, right? I mean, I've not being in a negative sense, but like, why would I do this versus just a W-2 where I don't have any of the quote unquote headaches,
Yep.
or risk, or, and I can get paid. Now, part of that, you know, I would think, at least traditionally for folks like us and older, is that at some point you're going to make more
Right.
in the partnership track than you would in the W-2. The W-2 or the employed model you might have a higher pay initially, right? Oftentimes, that's sort of like a steady up and to the right, maybe cost of living or set increases, and maybe that's tied to production, et cetera. But hopefully the partnership, overcomes that at some point, right? And that's the why you are willing to buy in. That's why you're willing to, maybe sign a personal guarantee, et cetera.
Yeah.
Do you have practices, and I'm guessing is the answer is yes, but it may be only larger practices where they have the ability to offer both. Like, hey, if you want to come in and just be a W-2, we can do that. But here's why you wouldn't want to be on the partnership track, et cetera. Is that something like a two-part bottle? And is there a certain
Yeah.
size where that can make sense? Or in small practices, it's like, hey, we need these people to become partners at some point. So we don't really have the employed only opportunity at our practice. So give
Yeah.
me a couple thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and the answer is, we're seeing practices shift their model from kind of a two-tiered partnership structure to a three-tiered partnership structure, and that's been a lot of the work I've done with practices over the last 5 years. And there's nothing necessarily novel about the approach. It's the law firm approach. It's the accounting firm approach. It's any professional services firm approach other than maybe medicine historically, where what a number of practices are moving to, large and small alike, to account for and to overcome the issue of this question of younger doctors asking, what does it mean to be partner, or to give more opportunities for, for different structuring, is a three-tiered model where you start off as an associate physician, you move to call it a non-equity partner physician, and then potentially to an equity partner physician, again, creating different tiers of opportunity, but also that middle non-equity partner rung of the ladder helps to overcome the issue that you're describing. What if I'm particularly risk averse, or what if it's just not attractive enough for me to want to make, the investment, make the buy-in? The answer is that's fine. You'll be a non-equity partner. You'll be at this rung of the ladder. There's nothing wrong with it. But, if you want the risk, the reward comes with the risk. But if you don't want that, then there's this, middle rung for you.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, you and I know it from law firms, pretty popular there. And it is good that practices are adapt. So, if what would you say broadly are some ownership comp models that are working? And obviously, maybe part of that is this three-tiered structure where
Mhm.
there's employed, non-equity, and equity. What are practices thinking about? What should the people watching or listening to us be thinking about in terms of, where things are at today
Yeah.
in terms of comp models and partnership
Yeah,
managers?
I think, we're seeing more of these three-tiered partnership structures increasingly, associate, non-equity, equity partner. It just provides for, this kind of generational shift. Other things that we're seeing work well is really based upon a macro change in practice buy-ins. It used to be quite common in the 80s and 90s that you'd have a really big, dollar buy-in to a practice, and you'd have a large dollar buy-in on the way out. Well, you don't see that anymore, both because physicians are laden with debt when they come out, and the economics of, physician practice isn't the same as in the 80s, 90s with HMO and, you know, um, commercial payer arrangements. So practices that have a large dollar buy-in and buyout are struggling, and a lot of them are looking to explore, changing their partnership model, especially where you have, a bolus of partners who are coming towards the end of their career. And, the practice is thinking, oh crap, what do I do? We've got coming due $2 million in buyout payments. Well, you've got a couple of choices. You can change your model, but of course, people may not be happy about that because they could be, counting on that money to fund their retirement, and which really leaves you with two options: to go out and get a loan to fund those buyouts, or to explore a potential sale to private equity to help fund those buyouts, both of which we're seeing, some of that occurring. But to answer your question of what's working well, we've seen a kind of a move to a low dollar value buy-in and buyout model, whatever low dollar value means in your particular market, and it really is market specific, or moving to some sort of sweat equity or model for the buy-in. Either, the answer is you don't pay a buy-in, or the first 2, 3, 4 years after you're made a partner, it results in a reduction in your compensation. And so doctors don't feel it the same way. It's not quite sweat equity, but you also don't have to go out and get a loan.
Got it. Yeah. Well, certainly the financial elements, the lenders that are there, the private equity, you want to, I think, if you're a practice, understand what the options are.
Yeah.
Even if, you end up saying, you know what, well, we have, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Meaning maybe it is working. Maybe relative, someone's watching this and relative to their marketplace, it is fairly low already. Maybe they've made that change over time, et cetera. But I think it's worth revisiting from time to time just to say, hey, are we where we should be relative to the market if we're going to continue to recruit people, or, look ahead. Hey, we have 3 docs in the partnership out of 8 who are going to be retiring within this 5 years. We need to think this through, not a year before they retire, right? I mean, we got to
Exactly.
get ahead of it and say, on that end, and this gets back to our topic, from a couple of years ago, exiting partners. But like, let's check in from time to time, even if there's no problem today. Let's make sure that we're maximally positioned for exits, for recruiting, taking advantage of what's out there, maybe in terms of private equity or loans, et cetera, so that we know where we're at. It's an evaluation of, you know, um, status quo, and could we be tweaking things to be better rather than being, I guess we would call that proactive, rather than being reactive. Oh, now we need to recruit a couple docs because a couple just left, or we see two or three, in the retirement mode in the next couple of years. What are we going to do? We owe them, like you mentioned, a buyout. So when I'm hearing this, I'm thinking, hey, this is something that practices should be proactive about,
Mhm.
checking in, reviewing, and just making sure they're in the right place, given
Yeah.
it's a
I think
changing market.
there's also a baked-in assumption, I think, in the discussion of physicians having an intrinsic thought in their mind of what their practices are worth. And there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of incorrect information. And the simple answer to creating a buy and buyout model, if you're thinking in those terms, is it depends on who the buyer is. If you're selling equity to a physician, or versus if you're selling your practice to your local hospital system, or if you're selling your practice to private equity, those buyers are willing to pay drastically different purchase prices for your business, or a piece of your business. Whereas private equity may be willing to pay multiples of earnings. Your physician who's buying in as a 10% owner doesn't look at your business the same way. And so if you are saying to a young doctor, well, I can go out to private equity and they're willing to pay X for this, well, then the young doctor being recruited has got two choices or three choices. He says, okay, go do it. I'm not willing to pay you for that much for your business. Or actually get them to pay that much for the business. But if I were a younger doctor, I'd say, okay, where's the guarantee? How do you know that your business is going to be worth this? How do you know you're going to be able to transact for that multiple? So just keep that in mind if you're thinking about having those discussions, if you're thinking about the value of your practice. A practice to practice physician sale, for most small to mid-sized practices with less than 5 physicians, there really isn't a whole lot of intrinsic value except maybe to private equity. You're going to transact at between 0.75 to 1.25 times EBIT to earnings, essentially 1 year's worth of net profits, versus private equity, which can look drastically different.
Yeah, because they're buying the whole business. They're integrating it typically with a whole platform. So there's going to be savings. I mean, it's a whole different thing than,
Luckily.
hey, come in and buy, 5%, 10% of this practice that isn't going to change at all, that isn't going to lay people off, that isn't going to be part of a larger
Yeah.
transaction and have it's just, it is what it is, right? So that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, what about different comp models existing and then trying to get docs to think about changing it? Okay.
Yeah.
Meaning if there's a common pot model, like, the whatever, we all, 7 of us, we all work and then we split a seventh of the profits, versus, productivity incentive models where, I work more, I get paid more, you work less, you get paid less, et cetera. Have you seen practices move between the two, and what motivates them, and what are some of the objections, and how do you overcome them? Maybe you could, comment on that, and if it's, going from common to productivity more often, start with that. Maybe you never see it the other way. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just give me an idea of what you've seen.
When practices are exploring revisiting their uh, organizational structure and their partnership structure, there's really kind of three different stools, or three different areas of the stool, legs to the stool.
Legs, yes.
They look at the the buy-in buyout. They look at oftentimes the tax treatment of their company. And then the third is
That's
really
C.
compensation. You know, the tax treatment, so many older practices are C, and should
Yeah.
they are going to S.
Yeah.
And the benefit of doing it, and how, you know, how long it takes in terms of the 5-year grandfathering. So that's another thing. But then the third and probably most important aspect is compensation. And there's really three comp models. There's the common pot, as you described it. There's an eat what you kill or productivity based model, or a hybrid model. And we've seen practices for the most part that are on common pot, where you all, throw it equally into the kitty and then you share, moving strongly to an eat what you kill model. Where you are getting paid some percentage of your net collections, and the remainder gets thrown into the pot for overhead cost and expense. And then if there's anything left over at the end of the year, it's paid out in the form of a dividend or distribution. We've seen a strong movement to productivity model, because there's an underlying objection of common pot that we're increasingly seeing, is that it disincentivizes high producers from wanting to work harder, and that there's a feeling of unfairness that high producers are supplementing the low producers, or physicians who are moving towards the tail end of their career. Common objections that we oftentimes hear to moving to productivity-based model are, uh, we're unique somehow and it won't work in our market. And oftentimes we find that unless the market is truly unique in some strange way, that moving to productivity more often than not works just fine. The only case that I've seen, and there's a way to deal with it, is if you've got kind of a tremendous amount of payer variability in your geography, where, let's say, north side, you've got a tremendous number of Medicaid patients. South side is, all high, high commercial pay. Well, there's got to be a way to address that in terms of productivity and fairness. And oftentimes it's some sort of formulaic hybrid approach to it. But we've seen most practices move to an eat what you kill productivity based model. There are legal considerations, fraud and abuse considerations associated with the Stark law, that it's important to understand if and when you do move to a productivity based model.
Yeah. It makes sense to me. I mean, I can't, that's why I kind of hedged the question, because I didn't think you'd see a lot of people going from productivity to common. I mean, it just seems like once you're used to, hey, having some, true revenue skin in the game, I can't think of any reason why you would want to go to something where everybody makes the same, because, like you said, again, we're not gonna generalize on generations, but if someone wants to join a practice and just not kill themselves, why should they get any resentment from their partners? Hey, I'm gonna just do this. I'm gonna do my 9 to 5, and I'm gonna do a good job for my patients. My patient's gonna like me, and I'm gonna have a good brand, but I'm just not gonna take call all the time and kill
Mhm.
myself. And you can, Jason, and you can make that extra money, and that's good for you and good for me. I mean, you have to have that kind of flexibility, it seems to me today, rather than assuming everybody is one or the other. Because if there is a variability among a group, even from two docs and more, then there's going to have to be resentment if you don't do it that way. That's the way human nature, as I understand it. I just don't
I
understand.
mean, it's again, another one of these generational shift issues. Do you value time or money more? Um, you can't have them both, right? If you want to make more money, you're going to have less time. If you want more time, you're going to make less money. Productivity based comp is the fairest way to get you there, whatever the right answer is for you.
That's right. That's a good way to, perfect way of saying it. So, what are some like symptoms that you see in a practice when you're talking to partners or practice managers or et cetera, CEOs, et cetera, and you say, it's probably time to revisit or maybe modernize your comp model? What are some things that you start to hear from clients to say, hey, there's an issue here. We probably should be addressing it? How does it come up to you?
Yeah, there's typically 4 or 5 ways where this issue comes up, where, I mentioned before, you have a critical mass of doctors nearing retirement, and you have this epiphany of, "Oh my gosh, our buyout is gonna be ridiculous over the next 5 years. Those are difficult discussions to have. Younger physicians asking the question, what do I get as a partner? What does it mean to be a partner? And you're finding that they're taking a pass on partnership for whatever reason. That's also a pretty good indication, and maybe time to revisit your partnership structure. One of the most challenging things that you can do, and I've seen a number of practices struggle with this, and quite frankly, a couple fall apart, is where you have too generous a compensation structure upfront for your younger physicians, such that when they're asking the question, what do I get as a partner? The answer is you get all the bad stuff. You have to sign guarantees. You're on the hook financially. You've already given away the financial piece of it because it's just, the productivity based model is too rich. So it's important not to create a model that still provides incentive. And then,
Can we talk about that for one
yeah,
second and then go to the next one?
sure.
So do you find that where maybe practices in not as desirable areas, and this is what they think they need to do to recruit docs, and then before they know it, they realize, oh man, this has some bad knockoff effects. It means that, yeah, we get them to come as a W-2, but they're never going to want to move to the partnership. Is that where you've seen that, where they've been too generous and then not thought about it,
Good
or some?
question. It really hasn't been, let's say in secondary markets or in outlying areas, rural areas. It's really been more of a lack of just forethought. I'll say that.
Yeah, not financial discipline, not running the numbers, not thinking it through, kind of.
Yeah, just someone feeling desperation to bring someone in. And maybe it is exactly what you're describing. It's just a recruiting issue and you just have to pay them more. And that makes perfect sense. And you have to account for that. But you always have to be able to explain to someone, what do I get? And if the answer is not additional compensation because you're going to be a partner, then what are the other opportunities? Is it that partners get to, be involved in maybe some of the ancillaries, whether it's ASCs or dialysis or real estate or research. And in order to be invested and get that investment opportunity, you have to be
Correct.
a partner. You have to create the right mix of carrots, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. Okay. Yeah, so sorry to interrupt. Continue. You were listing some other things
No, no.
that come up. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think, the in terms of, other indications, it's time to revisit the structure is, if you're losing doctors or you're losing merger opportunities, you wanna merge with another practice and they're just turning up their nose at your partnership structure, obviously, that's a really important reason. And then the last one is, when practices and their physicians do invest in ancillaries, and what do I mean by that? Labs, surgery centers, dialysis. There are different ways to structure those investments, but if you structure those investments where they are a part of the practice or a sub of the practice, you have to take those into account. Your practice buy-in and buyout structure is going to change. Whereas if most practices can set the value pretty readily in terms of we value our practice as X. As long as it's consistent from an accounting perspective and your accountant supports it and you're not giving it away, you have a lot of variability in being able to set your value. But if you have investments that, like dialysis and surgery centers, those require a fair market value buy-in and buyout. So now your practice is, let's say it's worth $100,000 buy-in plus the fair market value of these additional assets that require a fair market value buy-in. So that's another time where it's important to look at your partnership structure.
And um, the best practice, it seemed there, would be to, kind of separate those. And we've, asset protection, et cetera, have them in a separate entity. But what I'm really talking about is, as you were saying, consider them not only, hey, this is a place where I can make money in the future as in the partners, but this is something that should be integrated in our approach to this employee doc, non-equity, equity partner, right? Because like you said, maybe your comp is the same, but now you get to participate in the surgery center. And I have clients, you have clients who, you know, the surgery center has been the best thing financially in their career. I mean, their practice has been good, but they got in the surgery center at the right time and the right place and et cetera. And the dividend that that's been getting for them for 5, 10, 15, 20 years has, been the real kicker. And that's something that, again, maybe the non-equity docs don't get, and the other ones do. And there's a buy-in that might be substantial, but that still has a net present value that if we continue to do what they do, they're gonna get a real profit level on that too.
Makes sense.
Um, that's another benefit of having these ancillaries. It's not just the income, but it may allow you to integrate it in these comp models and recruit people and get exits and there's more levers to pull, I guess is the analogy, is the way I want to say it.
Some of
Uh,
the most successful practices in recruiting are the ones that have created these ancillary investment opportunities for their physicians. And given that not all specialty is going to have all of these
right,
different opportunities available, but for those that do, it does create a tremendous amount of secondary opportunity.
right. Last question. Red flags or things to be wary of. Are there any models that a physician practice, should, be wary of, or things that maybe have gone out of favor and for good reason because it's created some, compliance or legal or other issues?
Yeah, I think the one that we've really seen go out of disfavor is what I'll refer to as a founder's model, where one or more younger physicians signs on with an older doc, and the older doc says, okay, yes, I will sell you the business when I retire, and it's going to cost you $1 million or $2 million. And they're essentially funding their nest egg through the next set of doctors coming up. Like I said, the value of a practice is arbitrary. It's in the eye of the beholder. We've seen a lot of litigation and a lot of bad exits resulting from founders models where doctors, when it comes time to actually pay up and go and get a loan to fund that exit, they either can't or they've reconsidered. Everyone has kind of expectations that are unmet in that circumstance. Doctor's going to have to go out and start all over again, or we'll have to try and, put up a shingle in the community. Maybe there's non-compete issues. Maybe there's not. The older doctor suddenly is left without a source of income, potentially jeopardizing their retirement plan. So that's one that's particularly tricky, and we see a lot of issues around that. And then just more generally, buy-in and buyout structures that are large dollar on the way in and large dollar on the way out. We talked a little bit about that. Another particularly bad model is large dollar on the way in and no money on the way out, or you get your accounts receivable on the way out. Those used to be quite common back in the olden days, 80s, 90s. We don't see those as much anymore. If you have either of those two models, it's probably time to, start thinking about what else could we do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wanna end on that because I do think in the small practice, it's certainly changed. I mean, we've seen things change with the private equity, et cetera. And in many circumstances for the better, meaning that docs can have other options now, versus hey, I'm just going to have some young doc come in and learn from me 2 years and then write me a big check. But if you're listening or watching this and you think that's part of your plan, or these big buy-ins or buyouts, definitely, reach out to an expert. I mean, I would recommend Jason and start to talk this through because, I think ideally, again, like all this stuff, if you're proactive and you can see an issue in the future before it becomes, triage and you're in the financial ER because we got a problem, that's why you're listening to this. That's why you're reading the books. That's why you're talking to, that's why you're proactive. Some of your colleagues are not, and maybe some of your partners are. So if you're here and you got two partners and you're listening to this, get them to listen to it and watch it because you want everybody on the same page to try to be proactive and not only avoid the landmines, but maybe actually do something that's a win-win across the board. So,
Dave, to your point, just in
yeah,
terms of the timing for being proactive,
yeah,
ideally, you're starting to have these conversations 2 years ahead of time, if not more. And if you're thinking about selling your business, whether it's to your partner or to private equity or some other strategic, potentially thinking about them as as 5 years out.
Right.
And then, getting your business ready for that sale, ready for that exit, cleaning the windows, brushing off the counters, and I'm not talking about necessarily what an investment banker would do. That's actually getting ready for sale. This is more kind of even pre doing that. So, yeah, I agree with you completely. It's important to be proactive and think about these things as far in advance as you can. Easy for me to say in the cheap seats here because doctors are really busy people, but still something for them to think about.
I totally agree. Jason, thanks so much for being on. Appreciate it. I know why you're the first to make it to 3 episodes over 6 seasons, because you always bring great information and real world expertise. You know what's going on out there. So thanks for being back on.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
For those of you watching or listening, and I imagine most of you are still listening, thank you. In another 2 weeks, we'll have another episode. If you're so inclined, give us a 5-star review, write something nice, tell your colleagues and friends about us. We continue to grow. We hit 100 episodes in last season. We had over 50,000 downloads. I'm not sure what the number is today, but it's higher. So this is a resource a lot of people are taking advantage of, and so help us spread the word. Thank you.
The Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast is brought to you by OJM Group, a multidisciplinary wealth management firm dedicated to helping physicians build and preserve their wealth while reducing taxes. Episodes from previous seasons are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other popular platforms. Podcast listeners can get a free copy of our book, Wealth Strategies for Today's Physician. Simply text WPPOD to 844-418-1212 to request your free copy. Be sure to join David every 2 weeks for the newest episode of the Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast. This podcast is being provided for informational purposes only. The ideas and opinions expressed on this show by Mr. Mandell and his guests do not constitute legal, tax, or investment advice, or a recommendation of any particular security or strategy, and do not represent the opinions of the underwriters of this programming. Any information prepared from third-party sources is believed to be reliable, though its accuracy is not guaranteed. Opinions expressed in this commentary reflect subjective judgments of the speakers based on conditions at the time of recording and are subject to change without notice. Listeners should seek the input of their own financial, tax, and legal professionals before acting on any of the information provided.